Good afternoon. Ooh, that's a little loud. All right, if you all have any chips or drinks, if you could go ahead and open those up before we begin. All right, welcome to the Heritage Center's presentation on the history of slavery at Nazareth. For those of you that don't know, my name is Veronica Priest, and I'm one of the archivists, and this is Michael Smith, Heritage Hall Coordinator. Okay. A history of the slavery at Nazareth. Settlers from Maryland and Virginia often brought enslaved people with them to help in building the newly opened territory of Kentucky. The slave trade grew rapidly in Kentucky due to its proximity to the Ohio River and the great need for laborers in the early days. As shown in the early records of the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, the first enslaved people came to Nazareth with women of means who entered the congregation. At the request of the former owner, some of these men and women were freed a short time later. And you'll see behind me is an excerpt from the early annals from 1822, and it reads, "The two colored servants were Abe, brought to the community by Sister Mary Gwynn, a mere boy, then aged about 14, and Teresa, called Terry, brought by Sister Mary Leake. Terry, too, was scarcely grown. With this help, the sisters put in the crops and prepared a garden to furnish vegetables for the family during the ensuing season." The sisters operated a boarding school for girls and managed a farm to feed the sisters, students, and servants. Help was needed to work the farm, to assist in the maintenance of the academy, and to care for the young students. On the top left here, you'll see a drawing of New Nazareth, which is dated from 1824, after the sisters had moved to this location from St. Thomas. And then on the bottom right, you can see there a recreation hall circa 1825 that was built for the enslaved on campus. On this slide here, okay, there we go. Here is a drawing of Nazareth Academy from 1855. This depicts, you can see the academy on the left and St. Vincent Church on the right. Both of these were constructed in part by enslaved laborers. In later years, enslaved people were bought and sold, usually among Catholic families in the area, as they were not to be sold, quote, down the river. The 1830 U.S. Census lists 13 enslaved people at Nazareth. By the 1840 census, that number had increased to 27. Nazareth annals record that at the time of emancipation, 30 people were freed, including children. Other documents in the Nazareth archives include bills of sale for the purchase of enslaved persons and one petition to free a man named Luke. And on the screen here, we have a letter from Reverend Hazelton to Sister Elizabeth Suttle at St. Vincent's in Union, Kentucky. It reads, "Sister Elizabeth, the Council of Nazareth has just decided that George must be sold to go out of the county of Union, and you are desired to make arrangements with Mr. Clements, who owns George's wife, that they may go together, as we will not separate the husband from his wife. You can see Mr. Clements and agree on some plan that our wishes may be carried into effect, and the sooner it is done, the better you will please all concerned. And this record here,
It's not even doing it.
all right. And this record here is a letter of manumission, the original grant and correspondence between Father Hazelton and Mother Catherine. It reads, "Know all men by these presents that Dr. J. Hazelton and Catherine Spaulding have manumitted and set free, and by these presents do manumit and set free one Negro man named Luke, aged about 48 years, about 5 feet 6 or 7 inches high, heavy made, and quite black with a scar over the right eye and on the left wrist. In testimony whereof we have hereto set our hands this 15th of August, 1840.
A paper, Blacks at Nazareth, dating to the 1850s, lists the names and birth dates of enslaved adults ages 13 and older, and also includes the names and birth dates of children of each of the women. Letters between sisters provide a rich source of information on the daily life of the times and include some items of the personal lives of those enslaved. Especially valuable are letters with news of enslaved people written to Sister Claudia Elliott in Nashville, who had overseen them while at Nazareth. Within most letters, the euphemistic term faithful servants was more commonly used than the word slave. In some letters, slaves were included in references to the entire household or the whole family. The enslaved worked alongside the sisters in the kitchen, dining rooms, dormitories, laundry, dairy, and hen house, as well as performing numerous other tasks. Those who worked the farm were under the direction of an overseer. Life was hard for everyone in the pioneer days of Kentucky. Food was often scarce for both sisters and the enslaved. One letter tells of a diet of boiled beans and bean soup, another of eggs and hominy, another of clabber and corn hoe cakes, and still another of coarse flour, some middling, and potatoes and meat when it was available. Dress was simple. The clothing for the enslaved was made by the sisters and the older women who resided with the sisters. In one letter, there is a reference to the sisters mending the rags of the servants. The enslaved would have had a slightly better set of clothing to wear to the church on Sunday and for special occasions. At times, enslaved persons were temporarily assigned to different houses of the congregation, just as the sisters were. In addition to Nazareth, the sisters had schools at St. Vincent Academy in Union, Kentucky, St. Catherine Academy in Lexington, the Orphans Asylum in Louisville, and the hospital and school in Nashville, Tennessee. The assignment of the enslaved people to those houses was recorded in the minutes of the council of the congregation. And this would be an excerpt from a letter that Mother Frances Gardner had written to Sister Claudia Elliott in Nashville, Tennessee. Give my love to Isabel. Tell her I don't forget her. Tell her little Sue is much grown and a pretty and smart and spoiled little thing. That Ellen is a good girl and has made her first communion and irons the capes and collars of the sisters as well as Sister Ann says, and one can do. And besides, she sews very well, helps in the church, and works in the garden. She is a real little woman. Rachel has grown too, and on days of washing, she cooks for all the family. The sisters have begun their new house. Pray for me. Yours sincerely, Frances. And this next excerpt is from a different letter that Mother Frances Gardner had written to Sister Claudia Elliott in Nashville, dated August 14th, 1845. You don't know how much everybody wishes to see Sister Claudia. When I came home from Nashville, every Negro on the place wanted to go and live with you. Tell Isabella that I sent Ellen, Rachel, Little Sue, and Aunt May a present as I promised. And when I meet with the opportunity, I'll think of her and Martha. I hope they will be good girls. Farewell. Yours in our Lord, Frances.
Okay, sorry about that. I am not sure what's happening here. So we're going to continue on. This next section focuses on marriage. And although the state of Kentucky did not recognize marriages between enslaved persons, the Catholic Church encouraged it and blessed the marriages sacramentally. The enslaved were allowed to marry with the permission of their owners. In the case of two different owners, permission from both had to be obtained. Husbands and wives were not to be separated, and if sold, were to be sold together. If they had to be separated, they were to be sold to other Catholic families, quote, not more than 2 days away from the spouse. At Nazareth, marriages were performed by the priest in the church and celebrated with a feast prepared by the kitchen and pantry. We have what would be on the screen, an excerpt from a letter of Mother Frances Gardner to Sister Claudia Elliott, and it reads, "Tomorrow, Emily and Henry are to be married. She did not come home until we wrote for her. Great preparations are going on today. Our good confessor will perform the ceremony as Father Hazelton is gone to Bullitt to give church."
So this next section would deal with faith and religion for the enslaved. Slavery as an institution was generally accepted by the leaders of the Catholic Church in Kentucky and in much of the South. Owners were directed to treat the enslaved humanely, and the enslaved were instructed to obey their owners. The Catholic community held a strong belief that the enslaved people had souls to be saved, just as the white people, and every effort was made to provide catechesis in preparation for the reception of the sacraments. At Nazareth, enslaved people could choose to be baptized or not, and parents were allowed to decide whether and when their children would be baptized. These baptisms were recorded in the Nazareth church records and celebrated with plum cake and frolic. In an excerpt from a letter written from Sister Isabel Drury to Sister Claudia Elliott in Nashville, she says, "Mary Bean and Jane intend to have a christening here about Christmas, and you are all invited to come up to the frolic and get some of the plum cake. I believe Matilda intends to put off her christening until Easter. Then you can come up again. You know it will give you a little recreation." Spiritual retreats were provided annually for the students, servants, and the enslaved. In addition to the general instructions, the enslaved had special conferences to teach them that they must save their souls by obeying their earthly masters, and that by faithfully observing God's law, they may be happy here and eternally happy hereafter.
Several enslaved people died, many as infants or young children, and were buried at Nazareth, most likely in a slave cemetery, the location of which is unknown. At least one enslaved woman, Amy, died in childbirth, and one enslaved man, James, drowned. Records show that 4 enslaved people died during the cholera epidemic of 1833. Others had died of old age or illness. Wooden crosses would have marked their graves just as wooden crosses marked the early graves of the sisters. Over time, the names of the enslaved were lost, and their remains were relocated to a common grave in the sisters' cemetery. The photo behind me is a tombstone in the Nazareth Cemetery that reads, "William Butler and wife and other faithful servants of Nazareth."
During the American Civil War, some 20,000 Confederate soldiers came to Bardstown, led by General Braxton Bragg. As history reports, 70,000 Federal troops advanced into Bardstown, driving Bragg and his men east into Perryville. In a letter from the year 1862, the writer reports that 2 of Nazareth's enslaved men were taken by the Union Army. At this time, they would not have been allowed to enlist as soldiers and were likely used as laborers on roads, bridges, and railroads. One letter reported that there is fighting going on all around us. On October 4th, 1862, a skirmish took place between Confederate and Union forces just outside of Nazareth's gates on Bardstown Pike. A letter dated August 27, 1864, reported that a Negro regiment had been stationed near Bardstown for just about 2 weeks. This same letter tells that 6 more enslaved men left Nazareth to join the army. And by October, another letter reported a 7th enslaved man had left. In an excerpt from Mother Columba Carroll to Mary Ann Murphy, dated August 27, 1864, she wrote, "Arresting has been going on in Louisville and around, and there has been another great excitement among the Negroes which still exists. 6 more of ours left the first of this week. A Negro regiment has been stationed near Bardstown for about 2 weeks. They are quiet as far as I know." By late 1864, the Union Army had suffered many casualties and was in need of more soldiers. The Army began recruiting enslaved men in Kentucky, offering freedom to anyone who enlisted. Recruiting stations were opened in Louisville and Lebanon, and a training camp, Camp Nelson, was stationed in Jessamine County for the United States Colored Troops.
The Emancipation Proclamation, once ratified, granted freedom to enslaved people in the Confederate States. Since Kentucky was a border state under Union control, the freeing of enslaved people was not implemented until December 1865, when the 13th Amendment was adopted by Congress. However, those enslaved at Nazareth were given their freedom earlier that year, sometime between February and September. A description of this parting is recorded in the early annals of Nazareth and is included in these pages. The freed men, women, and children were provided with provisions and rental huts nearby. And on the screen here, we have an excerpt from the early annals recorded by Sister Marie Menard. It reads, "The government has suddenly emancipated 3 million slaves. Here we have about 30, counting the children. Nearly all were born and raised here. They are devoted to Nazareth, and the news, far from giving them joy, has caused quite a lamentation to arise among them. They say the government set me free, exclaimed Aunt Jane. Who is Mr. Government? I don't know him. I've lived here all my life. This is old now, to go about the wide world with nobody and nothing. If I know Mr. Government, I go to him and say, you give me a house and everything I want in it, and say, Aunt Jane, there is a comfortable home for you where you shall want nothing as long as you live. And I say, much obliged to you, sir, but I have a good home, and you turn me out to do for myself, perhaps to die with nobody to care for me, and you call that setting me free. Mother has had a dinner prepared for ours. They met for the last time around the old tables in the kitchen. A good supply of clothing and provisions has been prepared for each one. They've rented small huts in the neighborhood, for they say they cannot go far from home. Mr. Knott, our overseer, has already provided white hands to replace them.
In subsequent years, some of the freedmen and women from Nazareth continued to work with the sisters. The Mother House annals record that the descendants of some of these families worked at Nazareth well into the 1950s. For over 200 years, the SCNs have been blessed by the work of hundreds of employees. One of the most loyal and longest serving was Monroe Smith. Smith was born enslaved on August 15, 1848, on the Hill Farm in Nelson County. He recalled hoeing corn when he heard the news of the election of the nation's highest office of President Abraham Lincoln. After the Civil War, he remained 4 years at the Hill Farm as a freed laborer. Monroe worked as an odd job man around Bardstown until he was hired as a gardener at Nazareth, where he worked for 30 years until his death on August 17, 1947. Uncle Mon, as he was called, never married because, as he said, whenever I should have been courting, I was hiding stock and farm produce to keep them from the rebel and Yankee armies. Monroe Smith is buried at Nazareth Cemetery, and his portrait, painted by Sister Jean Harriet Barber, is displayed in Nazareth's Heritage Hall. The Mother House Annals from 1944 mention Mr. Smith as the fact that he continued working at Nazareth until he was close to 100 years old. The help situation at Nazareth grows daily more acute. From 4 and 5 boys in the kitchen, we have come down to 2. With Eddie called to military service February 4th, we will have 1 at Hamilton, and it is a matter of time how long he will stay. There are fewer hands on the farm, no regular man in the orchard. Help grandson of Aunt Alice Bevan, left for service. Uncle Mon, close to 100 years, raking leaves and burning grass. Gus Bevan called upon for everything and equally capable as mechanic, electrician, or farmer. Victoria Douglas, Eddie Douglas's mother, indispensable in the laundry. Following the war, it was recognized that the education of children was a great need. Leaders of the Catholic Church called for schools to be open and staffed for African American children. The Sisters of Charity of Nazareth responded to that call in 1871 and staffed St. Augustine's School in Louisville and St. Monica School in Bardstown. And by 1888, they staffed St. Peter Claver School in Lexington. In subsequent years, the sisters taught African American children in Owensboro, Uniontown, and Waverly, Kentucky, Columbus and Dayton, Ohio, Memphis, Tennessee, Ensley, Alabama, Helena and Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Yazoo City, Mississippi, and Morganza, Maryland. Healthcare was another area where the sisters responded to the need. African Americans were accepted at St. Joseph Hospital in Lexington very early, and a hospital was opened in Ensley, Alabama in 1941 to accommodate those who were not accepted in other hospitals. The hospital also provided a place for African American physicians to practice medicine. In 1912, during the centennial celebration of the foundation of the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, the families were invited back to Nazareth along with their children and grandchildren for a day-long celebration. Dinner was provided for the group of nearly 200. A tour was given, and a centennial program was performed by the Academy students. A photograph was taken of the entire group. Music and dancing completed the festivities. And this next long excerpt is from The Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, Kentucky, written by Anna Blanche McGill in 1917. This Saturday, October 19th, was reserved for the faithful colored servants of Nazareth, their children, and their grandchildren. At 9 o'clock, these guests arrived clean and well-dressed, eager to do as much honor as possible to their hostesses. Nearly everyone bore in his or her hand the centennial postcard that was sent out as an invitation. Old men and women with gray hair, their children and grandchildren, and babes in arms, the 200 in number responded to Nazareth's cordial invitation. On their arrival, they were shown the grounds, the museum, a place of special delight, and other scenes of particular interest. At noon, a banquet was served to them by the sisters, the spacious laundry being converted into a refectory, decorated in national and papal colors, flowers and banners in abundance. For their entertainment, the centennial pageant was then presented, and throughout the week, it had no more attentive or appreciative audience. At its conclusion, the guests entered the church where Monsignor Teeling gave benediction and Father Davis made a brief address, congratulating them on being children of Nazareth and exhorting them to prove themselves worthy of the sisters' fondness and care. For their entire assemblage, one of the most exhilarating moments was that when the photographer took their picture. After this August ceremony, the happy-hearted groups gathered again in the banquet hall, where, with singing and dancing, they concluded their joyous day. Among them were several who remembered Mother Catherine and Bishop Flagey. These octogenarians and their companions agreed that their centennial day at Nazareth would be forgotten. Never, never in this world. The Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, Sisters of Loretto, and Dominican Sisters of St. Catherine, now the Dominican Sisters of Peace, held a reconciliation service in Bardstown in 2000. That same year, the SCNs released a statement on slavery and racial inequality. And these photos behind me would be photos of the newspaper clipping as well as the statement on slavery that was made. During the bicentennial celebration of 2012, a monument was erected near the cemetery and dedicated to the men, women, and children who had been enslaved at Nazareth. The monument lists the names of those who died and could be identified. The front of the monument is graced with a plaque designed by renowned artist Ed Hamilton of Louisville. And lastly, in 2012, in 2022, a new exhibit highlighting the history and contributions of those enslaved at Nazareth was unveiled in Heritage Hall.
All right, thank you all for attending our presentation. Are there any questions? No? Oh, Sister Maria?
Hello, everyone. I'm Sister Maria Vincent Mercado. I would just like to say, I've been eating popcorn, excuse me. I would just like to say another word about the 2000, the experience in the year 2000. The three communities, the Sisters of St. Catherine in Springfield, the Sisters of Loretto, and the Sisters of Charity, us. The three of us decided that the year 2000 was a year of reconciliation in the Catholic Church. That was one of the themes of that year. And as we looked at it together, we realized that all three communities wanted and needed to express regret, sorrow for the fact that in our time we had enslaved people. So we did that. We planned that service in the year 2000. It was very moving. We had it at St. Joseph Cathedral in Bardstown. We asked the African American community to come. Sisters from all over came. It was a snowy day in December, but it gave us the chance to say publicly, we're sorry. That was that time. This is this time, and we regret that. Thank you all for coming today to listen. Thank you so much. I join the archive staff in expressing my gratitude for your openness to listen.
Thank you, Sister Maria Vincent. Are there any other questions? Okay. If not, thank you all, and have a good afternoon.